My name is Aria Sterling, and I am 29 years old. From the window of my corner office in Seattle, I can see the gray-blue expanse of Puget Sound, a view that costs more per month than I earned in my first 2 years of independence combined. I am the founder and CEO of Kindred Roots, a sustainable urban development firm that has, against all odds, become a multi-million-dollar success story. 11 years ago, my mother told me I was the greatest disappointment of her life, struck me across the face, and exiled me from our family home. My crime was refusing to marry the man she and my father had chosen for me. Today, I return to my hometown of Seacrest, Oregon, on our company's small jet, with my 5-year-old daughter, Stella, holding my hand. The look on my parents' faces when we stepped out of the car was worth every ounce of hardship I ever endured. Growing up in the Sterling household in Seacrest was like living inside a perfectly preserved, suffocatingly beautiful snow globe. Our town, nestled on the Oregon coast, was a postcard of historic charm: Victorian homes painted in sea glass colors, a main street lined with antique shops, and the constant, briny scent of the Pacific. Our home, a sprawling historic manor passed down through my mother's family, was the town's crown jewel. From the outside, it was magnificent. Inside, it was a museum of unspoken rules and crushing expectations. My mother, Catherine Sterling, curated our lives with the same meticulous, iron-willed precision she used to arrange the roses in her award-winning garden. Tall, slender, with silver hair always swept into an elegant chignon, she was a woman obsessed with lineage, legacy, and the perception of effortless grace. Every decision, from the charities we supported to the brand of tea we served, was calculated to uphold the Sterling family name. My father, Richard, a senior partner at the town's most prestigious law firm, was a quiet accomplice to her social engineering. He was a good man in a general sense, but his spine seemed to dissolve in my mother's presence. He would retreat behind his newspaper or into his study, offering me sympathetic but ultimately useless glances when my mother's critiques of my unladylike ambition or common choice of friends became too sharp. A young woman of your standing doesn't need a career, Aria. She needs a suitable match, became my mother's refrain as I entered my teenage years. My dreams of studying architecture and sustainable design were dismissed as a quaint hobby. My desire to volunteer at the local animal shelter was rerouted to chairing the junior committee for the Historical Society's annual gala. My love for comfortable jeans and worn-in sweaters was a source of constant, weary sighs. The battlefield was our formal dining room, a cavernous space where the clinking of sterling silver against bone china often accompanied lectures on my posture, my grades, which were impeccable but never, in her eyes, brilliant enough, and my general failure to attract the right sort of young men. My father would study the intricate pattern on his plate, his silence a heavier condemnation than my mother's words. As I neared my 18th birthday, the topic of my future marriage intensified. My mother had been carefully cultivating a relationship with the Hawthorns, a family whose wealth, derived from generations of timber, was considered new money but powerful enough to overlook. Their son, Preston, at 33 to my 17, was recently divorced and being groomed to take over the family empire. He had the right connections, the right portfolio, and, according to my mother, the right appreciation for our family's history. He's established, darling. Mature, she would say after one of their stilted visits. You should be honored he's taken such an interest in you. What my mother called interest, I felt as a cold, proprietary gaze. Preston's eyes would crawl over me during dinners, his compliments on my blossoming feeling less like flattery and more like an appraisal of livestock. When his hand would find the small of my back to guide me through a doorway, a wave of nausea would rise in my throat. Secretly, I nurtured my own plans. Late at night, under the covers with a flashlight, I filled out applications, not to the East Coast liberal arts colleges my mother approved of, but to the University of Washington's renowned School of Architecture. I paid the application fees with money I'd secretly saved from designing websites for small local businesses. My acceptance letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I hid it between the pages of a textbook, my heart a frantic drum of joy and terror. That same evening, My mother announced that the Hawthorns would be joining us for dinner on Saturday. A very special occasion, she'd called it, her smile tight with meaning. The week that followed was a blur of forced pleasantries. My mother's mood was unnervingly cheerful as she helped me choose a dress, a silk sheath in a pale, confining shade of beige, and insisted on a professional hairstyling appointment. Her kindness was a gilded cage, and I felt the bars closing in. The acceptance letter in my textbook felt like a key I was too afraid to use. The night before the dinner, I overheard them talking in their bedroom. "She's just a child, Catherine," my father's voice, uncharacteristically firm. "Nonsense," my mother's sharp reply. I was 19. Besides, the Hawthorns have been very clear about the benefits of this union. Preston's father has several important clients. He can refer to your firm. This secures her future, and it helps you make managing partner. It's what's best for everyone. I shrank back from the door, the cold reality settling in my stomach. This wasn't about my happiness. It was a merger. I was the asset being liquidated. The dining room chandelier cast a cold, brilliant light on the scene Saturday night. The table was set with the wedding china, a silent testament to my mother's confidence. I sat, rigid and silent, my hands clenched in my lap. The Hawthorns arrived, Preston exuding a smug charm that turned my stomach. He carried a small, blue velvet box, which he placed on the table with a theatrical flourish. "Arya," he greeted me, his kiss lingering too long on my cheek. "You look exquisite." Dinner was an agonizing performance of business talk and veiled references to the merging of our two great families. After dessert, Mr. Hawthorn cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. Preston stood, walked to my side, and dropped to one knee. The world tilted. "Arya Sterling," he said, opening the box to reveal a diamond so large it looked like a shard of ice. "Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Every eye was on me. My mother's, gleaming with triumph. My father's, clouded with resignation. The Hawthorns, alight with smug satisfaction. Preston's expression was not one of love, but of a deal successfully closed. I need a moment," I stammered, pushing my chair back and fleeing to the cool air of the back terrace. Preston followed me out, his smile replaced by a frown of irritation. That was hardly the reaction we discussed. "We never discussed this," I whispered, wrapping my arms around myself. "Preston, I barely know you." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Don't play the innocent, Arya. Your mother has been planning this for months. This is an arrangement. My father helps your father's career, your family's legacy is secured by my family's wealth, and I get a beautiful, well-bred young wife to host my parties and give me an heir." He stepped closer, reaching to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. "You'll want for nothing. Most girls would kill for this opportunity." I pulled away from his touch. "And what if I want more? What if I want to work? To have my own life?" His face hardened. "My wife will have no need for a job. Your life, my dear, will be with me." He gestured back toward the dining room. "I am your future." In that moment, I saw my entire life laid out before me, a beautiful, gilded cage where my wings would be clipped, my dreams discarded, my very soul owned by another. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it felt like a roar. "No, I will not marry you." His face darkened with rage. "You will regret this," he seethed, before turning on his heel and storming back inside. I took a deep breath, then another, before I followed. The atmosphere in the dining room had shattered. The Hawthorns were leaving, Mrs. Hawthorn hissing at my mother, who looked pale and shaken. When the front door slammed shut, my mother turned on me, her eyes blazing. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what you've just destroyed?" "I saved myself," I said, a strange calm settling over me. "I will not be a piece of property in a business deal." "Property?" she scoffed. "You ungrateful girl. This is because of that ridiculous dream of yours, isn't it? That letter from Seattle? Did you really think I wouldn't find it?" My heart sank. She had gone through my things. "I want to be an architect," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I want to build things, not be bought and sold." "You are a disappointment," she cried, her composure finally breaking. "After everything we have done for you, You throw it all away for some childish fantasy. Your father's career, our family's reputation ruined. I looked at my father, a silent plea in my eyes. He just stared at the floor. I'm sorry you see it that way, I said quietly. But my mind is made up. The slap was so fast I didn't see it coming. Her hand cracked against my cheek, the force of it snapping my head to the side. The sting was sharp, but the shock was worse. Get out, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. If you think you can make it on your own, then go. But don't you ever come back. Catherine, my father finally spoke, his voice a feeble protest. She has made her choice, my mother said, turning her back on me. You are no longer my daughter. In a daze, I went upstairs. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing it with a few clothes, my wallet, and the precious acceptance letter. When I came back down, my father was waiting by the door, his face ashen. Dad, please, I begged. He pressed a few bills into my hand, $250. It's all I can do, Arya, he whispered, his eyes filled with a sorrow that was too little, too late. I'm sorry. He opened the front door, and a gust of cold, damp air swept in. I stepped out onto the porch of the only home I had ever known, the door clicking shut behind me. Standing in the misty Oregon night, my cheek burning, I was utterly and completely alone. The damp coastal air chilled me to the bone as I walked away from the manor, each step a definitive break from my past. My phone, a lifeline my mother hadn't thought to confiscate, buzzed in my pocket. With trembling fingers, I called the only person I knew would understand. Chloe? It's Arya. I need help. Chloe and I had been friends since kindergarten, bonded by a shared love of climbing trees and a mutual disregard for social hierarchies. Her family, who ran a popular local bakery, was kind and grounded in a way my own family never was. My mother had always referred to Chloe as my little project, a comment that never failed to ignite my fury. Within the hour, Chloe's flour-dusted station wagon pulled up to the curb where I was huddled at a bus stop. I climbed in, my silk dress now wrinkled and damp, and told her everything through a flood of tears. Her parents welcomed me without question, setting me up on the pull-out sofa in their cozy, lived-in living room. You stay as long as you need, sweetie, Mrs. Kim said, her warm hands patting my shoulder. The 2 weeks I'd planned to stay stretched into 2 months. I couldn't afford the University of Washington, not without my parents' support. Instead, I enrolled in Seattle Central College, using my acceptance letter as proof of my academic standing. I found a job at a coffee shop near campus, then another, washing dishes at a restaurant on weekends. My life became a grueling rhythm of early morning shifts, late-night classes, and the constant, gnawing anxiety of paying rent on a tiny, sunless studio apartment I eventually found. That first apartment was my crucible. The size of my former walk-in closet, it had peeling paint, a window that faced a brick wall, and a radiator that clanged like a blacksmith's anvil. I ate instant noodles on the floor, owned a single fork, and slept on a mattress I'd found on the curb. But it was mine. There were nights I'd collapse onto that mattress, every muscle aching, my mind a chaotic swirl of architectural theories and the looming dread of bills. A scholarship rejection letter arrived on a particularly bleak Tuesday. I had pinned so much hope on it. That night, sitting in the dark, I almost called home. I imagined swallowing my pride, begging for forgiveness, and sinking back into the plush, suffocating comfort of my old life. Instead, I called Chloe. You left for a reason, she said, her voice a firm anchor in my sea of doubt. Don't you dare forget that. The next morning, exhausted and shaky, I was trying to manage the morning rush at the coffee shop when I fumbled a customer's latte, spilling it down the front of her expensive coat. Mortified, I apologized profusely and rushed to make a new one. The woman, instead of being angry, just watched me with calm, perceptive eyes. Tough morning, she asked when I handed her the fresh drink. Tough year, I admitted with a wry, tired smile. Her name was Isabel Monroe, and she was a partner at one of Seattle's leading architecture firms. She came back the next day and the day after. On the third day, she handed me her card. We have an entry-level opening for an office assistant, she said. It's mostly filing and coffee runs, but it's full-time, with benefits. You're bright and you handle pressure well. Interested. That moment was the pivot on which my entire future turned. The job was menial, but it was a foot in the door of the world I longed to inhabit. I kept taking night classes, my focus now sharper than ever. Isabel became the mentor I never knew I needed. She noticed me staying late to study the firm's blueprints, saw the sketches I doodled in my notebook during my lunch break. She started giving me small drafting tasks, then let me help with 3D modeling for a minor project. You have a good eye, Sterling, she told me one afternoon after I'd pointed out a flaw in a design that everyone else had missed. Nurture it. My first real promotion came a year later, after I single-handedly rebuilt a complex project model that had been corrupted the night before a major client presentation. The raise meant I could finally quit my dishwashing job. The second promotion, to junior designer, came 18 months after that. I moved into a one-bedroom apartment with reliable heat and a window that saw the sun. The path was still hard. There were moments of profound loneliness, watching old acquaintances from Seacrest post photos of their European vacations and lavish weddings on social media. I got sick and had to choose between paying for medicine and paying my electricity bill. But with every obstacle I overcame on my own, a quiet strength began to build within me. The memory of my mother's slap still stung, but it no longer defined me. For years after leaving home, I graduated with my associate's degree. 6 years after that, after a long, slow climb of working full-time and taking every night and weekend class available, I held a Bachelor of Architecture in my hands. Isabel was in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. My parents' seats were empty. I hadn't sent an invitation. A few months after my graduation, Isabel called me into her office. "Arya," she said, her expression serious. "I have to let you go." My heart plummeted. "What?" "Why?" "Because you've outgrown us," she said with a smile. "Your ideas, your passion for sustainable, community-focused design, it's bigger than what we do here. You need to start your own firm." I laughed, the sound hollow with disbelief. "Isabel, I have student loans and about $1,000 in savings." She slid an envelope across her desk. Inside was a personal check for $40,000. "Consider it an investment," she said, cutting off my protests. "I want 15% equity. I know a good bet when I see one." And so, Kindred Roots was born. I rented a tiny, one-room office and poured every ounce of my energy and Isabel's investment into my vision, creating beautiful, affordable, and environmentally conscious living spaces for real communities. The first year was brutal. I was the architect, the bookkeeper, the receptionist, and the janitor. I nearly went bankrupt twice. My breakthrough came with a project to revitalize a neglected public park in a low-income neighborhood. Instead of imposing a design, I held community workshops, incorporating residents' ideas into the final plan. The project won a local design award and, more importantly, it got noticed. It was during a pitch for a mixed-use community housing project that I met Ethan. He ran a nonprofit that funded small-scale urban agriculture, and he was a potential partner on the project. Unlike other potential clients, he didn't just ask about budgets and timelines. He asked about my philosophy. "You don't just build buildings," he said after our first meeting. "You build belonging." Our professional collaboration slowly blossomed into a deep and easy love. Ethan celebrated my ambition. He wasn't intimidated by my drive, he was inspired by it. He was kind, funny, and possessed a quiet strength that felt like coming home. When I discovered, 2 years into our relationship, that I was pregnant, my first thought was a panicked one: I would not become my mother. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked gently that night, seeing the fear in my eyes. "I'm thinking I don't know how to be a parent without a blueprint for healthy love," I confessed. He took my hands in his. "Then we'll draw up a new blueprint together," he said. Our own. 9 months later, our daughter, Stella, arrived, a tiny, perfect being with her father's calm green eyes and my stubborn spirit. Holding her for the first time, I made a silent vow. She would always be free. Free to choose, free to dream, free to be exactly who she was, and she would be loved not in spite of it, but because of it. Balancing motherhood and a growing company was a new kind of challenge. I converted a corner of my office into a nursery. Ethan, whose work was more flexible, became a true co-parent. We were a team. We married on a Tuesday afternoon at City Hall, with Isabel and Chloe as our witnesses, and Stella sleeping soundly in a baby carrier on my chest. It was a union built on partnership and respect, the antithesis of the one I had fled. By Stella's 5th birthday, Kindred Roots had offices in Seattle and Portland. We had been featured in architectural digests and business journals. The company jet, a small, practical Cessna, was a necessary tool for travel between sites, but it was also a staggering symbol of how far I'd come from that misty night on my parents' porch. Throughout all of it, I had maintained my silence. I heard snippets of news through the grapevine. My father had stepped down from his partnership. My mother was less socially active. I wondered if they ever thought of me, but I had built a new life, a new family, and I thought that chapter was closed forever. Then, an email from a distant aunt arrived. Your father had a serious stroke last week. He's stable, but the doctors say his recovery will be long. I just thought you should know. That night, after I tucked Stella in, I stood on our balcony, looking out at the city lights. What is it? Ethan asked, wrapping his arms around me. My father could have died, I said, the words catching in my throat. And I wouldn't have known. There's a granddaughter-shaped hole in their lives, and they don't even know her name. The next day, I made 2 decisions. First, Kindred Roots would bid on the Seacrest Waterfront Revitalization Project, a major undertaking that would require my presence in my hometown. Second, after 11 years, it was time to go back. Not for them, but for me. And for Stella, who deserved to know all the roots of her story, even the broken ones. Mommy, why don't I have 4 grandparents like Chloe does? Stella's question, posed one evening during story time, was the one I had been dreading for years. At 5, her world was beautifully simple, and my lack of parents was a glaring anomaly. You have Grandma Isabel, I said, referring to my mentor, who had wholeheartedly embraced the role. Stella considered this. But where are your mommy and daddy? The question, so innocent, landed with the force of a physical blow. I had compartmentalized the pain for so long, but seen through my daughter's eyes, the absence was a stark, gaping hole. They live very far away, sweetie, I said, the half-truth a shield against a story too complex for a child. Can we visit them? Her guileless hope was a turning point. That, combined with my aunt's email about my father's stroke and the upcoming Seacrest project, felt like the universe was nudging me toward a reckoning. I had to go back. I had to face the ghosts of my past, if only to ensure they wouldn't cast a shadow on my daughter's future. I didn't call ahead. Part of me, the part that was still that wounded 18-year-old, wanted the element of surprise. I wanted them to see me not as the defiant girl they'd cast out, but as the woman I had become on my own terms. The flight to the small coastal airport was smooth. Stella was thrilled by the tiny plane, while my own stomach was a knot of anxiety. As we descended, the familiar coastline came into view. The jagged cliffs, the dense green of the Sitka spruces, the gray churn of the ocean. It was achingly beautiful and filled me with a profound sense of dread. We drove our rental car, a quiet, expensive sedan, through the streets of Seacrest. It felt like a town in a dream, the same but different, smaller. We checked into a boutique hotel on the waterfront, and I changed into a tailored wool dress and heels, my armor. The drive to my childhood home was the longest 12 minutes of my life. As we pulled up to the manor, I saw the signs of neglect immediately. The once immaculate gardens were overgrown with weeds, the paint on the trim was peeling, and one of the porch steps sagged. It was as if the life had gone out of the house when I left. Is this where you lived, Mommy? Stella asked, her face pressed to the window. A long, long time ago, I said. Taking a deep breath, I led Stella up the familiar stone path. The doorbell played the same pretentious chimes I remembered. The door creaked open, and my father stood there. He was so much thinner, his face deeply lined, his frame stooped inside a worn cardigan. His eyes widened in disbelief. Arya, he whispered, as if I were an apparition. Hello, Dad, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. His gaze fell to Stella, who was hiding behind my legs. Richard, who is it? My mother's voice called from within. She appeared in the hallway and froze, her hand flying to her mouth, her perfect composure finally cracking. "I thought it was time for a visit," I said into the thick silence. "And time for you to meet your granddaughter." At the word granddaughter, my mother seemed to sway. My father instinctively reached out to steady her. "This is Stella," I said, gently nudging my daughter forward. Would you like to come in?" my father managed, stepping aside. The inside of the house was a dusty time capsule. The same furniture, the same paintings, the same oppressive silence. But there was a fine layer of dust on everything and the air felt stale. An awkward silence fell as we stood in the grand entryway. "We saw you," my father blurted out suddenly. "In the Architectural Digest. The article about community-focused design." I stared at him stunned. "We have them all," my mother said, her voice barely a whisper. "The business journals, the local news features from Seattle. We followed your career." My father disappeared upstairs and returned a moment later with a large, leather-bound scrapbook. He placed it on the coffee table. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside, meticulously cut out and pasted, were dozens of articles, printed web pages, and even blurry photos of me at project sites. A complete, secret history of the life I had built without them. "Your room," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's just as you left it." I followed her up the grand staircase to my old bedroom. She opened the door and I gasped. It was true. My books were still on the desk, my comforter still on the bed. It was a shrine to a ghost. "Why?" I asked, turning to face her. "At first, I was too angry," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Then, it was all I had left of you. It was my reminder of my greatest failure." The admission, so raw and uncharacteristic, hung in the air between us. Downstairs, a fragile truce was forming. Stella, having discovered a photo album, had charmed my father into telling her stories about the little girl in the pictures. "You had pigtails just like me, Mommy," she chirped. "She was always a determined little thing," my father told Stella, a sad smile on his face. Knew her own mind, even then. Seeing them together, a man I barely recognized and a daughter he'd never met, I knew I had to ask. "Why did you never call?" "Not once." My parents exchanged a pained glance. "Pride," my father said, his voice heavy with regret. "And shame. After we heard what happened to Preston Hawthorne." "What happened to him?" I asked. "He was arrested a few years back," my father said quietly. "For domestic abuse. His wife, she looked a lot like you." When we read that, Catherine, well, it broke something in both of us. To know what we almost pushed you into. He took a shaky breath. "And by then, you were so successful. You had built this incredible life without us. We felt we had lost the right to be in it." The pieces clicked into place. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a flicker of understanding. As Stella's stomach began to growl, I knew we had to leave. "Perhaps you could all come for dinner tomorrow night?" my mother asked, her voice tentative. "We'd like to meet your husband." "We'll see," I said, not ready to commit. As I gathered our things, I made a decision. "I'm opening an office here for the waterfront project." "Dad, you spent 40 years as a lawyer, managing contracts and clients. The firm could use someone with your experience, on a consulting basis." The offer, a professional lifeline instead of a handout, hung in the air. It was a bridge, built not of forgiveness, but of practical, respectful brick and mortar. That night, I told Ethan everything. They kept a scrapbook, Ethan. Of my entire life. "Love is complicated, Arya," he said, taking my hand. "People can be terribly wrong and still love you in their own broken way. The question is, do you want to start the process of putting the pieces back together?" I looked at Stella, asleep in the hotel bed, her face peaceful. "For her," I said. "I think I have to try." The following evening was a careful dance of diplomacy. We returned for dinner, Ethan, Stella, and I. My mother had cooked all my childhood favorites, an unspoken apology on a plate. My father shook Ethan's hand, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and respect. The tension was palpable, but Stella, in her innocent way, was the perfect ambassador. She showed my mother her drawing of a sea otter and made my father laugh with a knock-knock joke. After we tucked her into a bed in a guest room, the four of us sat in the living room, the space between us filled with 11 years of unspoken words. If we're going to have a relationship, I began, my voice clear and steady, we need to have boundaries. I laid them out, one by one. Stella's autonomy would be respected. My marriage was a partnership. My father's job was a professional arrangement. They listened, nodding, their faces a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. As we were leaving, my father pulled me aside. I was a coward, Arya, he said, his eyes welling with tears. That night, I should have stood up for you. I should have gone after you. And I have regretted it every single day of my life. The apology I never knew I needed washed over me, a quiet, healing wave. My mother's apology came 3 months later, during one of my visits to oversee the new office. It wasn't grand or eloquent. We were in her garden, the one she was slowly starting to tend to again. I was so afraid, she said, not looking at me, her hands buried in the soil. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just trying to control you. I am so sorry, Arya, for the pain I caused you. I was wrong. It wasn't a magic wand. The wounds were too deep for that. But it was a start. My father thrived at the new firm, his decades of experience proving invaluable. My mother began to learn the delicate art of being a grandmother, slowly replacing her need for control with a genuine, gentle affection. We started family therapy, all of us. A year after my return, we celebrated Stella's 6th birthday at a public park in Seacrest. Not the stuffy manor, but a place of sun and open air. I watched as my father, in his work trousers, let Stella teach him how to use the swings, a real, unforced smile on his face. A penny for your thoughts, Ethan said, sitting beside me on the bench. I was just thinking, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder, about how you can't choose the family you're born into, but you can choose what your family becomes. Later, as we cut the cake, my mother took a photo of all of us. Wait, let me get another one, she said, peering at the small screen. Arya, you're not really smiling. The old criticism surfaced, and I felt myself tense. But then she added, or don't. It's your choice. It's a lovely picture either way. That small concession felt more significant than any grand gesture. It was an acknowledgement of my right to my own feelings, my own choices. That night, scrolling through the photos, I paused on that one. It was imperfect. Stella was mid-laugh. My father was looking at her instead of the camera. My mother's smile was a little wobbly, and Ethan and I were caught in a private, knowing glance. It wasn't the pristine, posed portrait of my childhood. It was real. The journey from that cold, misty night to this warm, sunlit afternoon had been longer and more arduous than I could have ever imagined. The scars from my past had not vanished, but they had become a part of my strength, a map of where I had been. True success wasn't the private jet or the thriving company. It was the hard-won freedom to define my own life, to break a cycle of pain, and to build a future for my daughter based not on control, but on unconditional love. And that was a foundation more solid and more beautiful than anything I could ever design or build.